So my task today is actually to finish the conversation of talking about how cities like New York are basically a microcosm of the catastrophic brutality caused by a capitalist economy during natural disasters. Um, quite frankly, most of the disaster is anything but natural. Negative externalities created by the neoliberal agenda of the capitalist system we live in boom and are reinforced during the entire experience of storms like Hurricane Sandy. The development of neoliberalism has given rise to the disaster industrial complex, as people call it nowadays, in which the physical devastation by the storm just fast forwards the process of privatization. What you see is profits soar, the process of gentrification booms, and none of the companies that own and therefore control capital actually shoulder the cost of the devastation. Every aspect of our daily lives reflects this class-based and imperialist structure we live in. That is to say, that the experience of the rich and white during and after the storm was and continues to be by no means the same as that of the poor and black. And brown, as we further discuss demographics of New York City. Furthermore, it is more important to note how during this time various social dynamics indicative of how colonial relationships are still in existence were brought to the forefront during and after the hurricane. I do realize that this is a very loaded image to unpack in just 10 minutes or 15. But what I will try to do is work my way through this using a few specific examples, and then we can discuss it later, from which we can extrapolate the complex conjecture in the process of neoliberalization. So how does neoliberalism enable disaster? And I really want to start off with Con Edison. First of all, I want to ask, who here is from New York City? Born and raised and parents and, really from New York. Okay. Who here just moved here for school or something? Yeah. Okay. This is definitely gonna be interesting when we come to the discussion. Con Edison and the privatization of public utilities. As some of you might remember, there was a complete blackout in many parts of the city. Hundreds of thousands of people were left without power for almost 2 months and even more. And it's important to remember that soon after the storm, the temperature dropped to freezing levels. There were notable differences as to who got their power restored first. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a building in the financial district that was the Goldman Sachs building that didn't even blink. Because these buildings have their own power generators, right? On other places like the Rockaways, Red Hook, Coney Island, they were out, like I said, for almost until very recently, actually, or destroyed, utterly destroyed. So, what I'm going to actually pick up on a point that my comrade touched on, and this is that the black and brown communities in the Rockaways and Red Hook were actually a deliberate development during the 50s and the 60s by Mayor Moses. He made, during this time, he made very racist comments about how this was actually a place to put, the niggers or something like that, and the poor Puerto Ricans, and, so this is not a coincidence, so let's start with that. So the people living here, they are living in, first of all, buildings that have very weak infrastructure, because very little work was put into the planning of these buildings, right? They live in high-rises that makes it very hard for you to come downstairs if you have any kind of health or disability problem. And as we know, there's definitely, I shouldn't assume that we all know, but yes, there is a huge disparity in terms of who has access to health care, and who doesn't. And most of the people living in these houses don't, right? So, so they were built on weak ground. So now in 2013, the same housing projects exist with outdated and beyond worn out infrastructure. Electricity is delivered to these underdeveloped areas through overhead distribution. So like usually if you go to suburban areas, you see like what they call cherry pickers, which you see the workers doing the wires and everything. That's really dangerous, especially in a city like New York and the areas that we're discussing, right? Salt water is terrible for wires. And actually, if you remember, there was a huge fire in Far Rockaway and Breezy Point, destroyed like a huge number of houses. However, that was the more affluent sector, and they did have more access to insurance. Whereas the other parts of Far Rockaway, they did not, and they were also, there more and more. There's a growing immigrant community here, so of different parts of the world, and they are just, forget it. They work very jobs that barely make ends meet, or they have other things that they need to spend on, and then they can't apply for a lot of these insurances and credits and things like that. So there's overhead distribution, and in the more affluent neighborhoods and the neighborhoods that were gentrified quickly, or rather much sooner than, for example, Brooklyn, like Wall Street and Greenwich Village and all of that, they have what is called underground distribution. But this is, and that's safe from regular wear and tear, and definitely much easier to repair during hurricanes like Sandy. So energy and developments in that technology, though, does move accordingly to gentrification. The richer the neighborhood, the more they consume and can actually pay the bill. Con Ed, therefore, rewards them by providing reliable services. The primary interests of Con Edison were